Our Father who art in heaven, as a body we congregate in this council chambers for the betterment of our fellow citizens, lead us that we may do all things well. Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Taberky?
Present.
Mr. Brickwig?
Here.
Ms. Hausfeld?
Here.
Mr. Bob Culbertson?
Here.
Ms. Bettinghouse?
Here.
Mr. Ray Culbertson?
Here.
And Mr. Schildmeyer.
Present.
Let the record show that all 7 members are present. Members of council, what are your pleasure of the minutes, reading of the minutes of the last meeting?
Mr. President,
Ms. Bettinghouse.
I make a motion to dispense with the reading of the written minutes of the council meeting.
I'll second that, Mr. President.
Motion by Ms. Bettinghouse, seconded by Ms. Hausfeld to dispense with the reading of the last minutes. Are there any remarks? If not, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? So ordered. Members of council, are there any errors or corrections to the minutes as submitted? If not, the minutes will stand as submitted. We'll move to reports of city officials. Mayor, Mr. Stuchel.
Thank you, Mr. President. At this time, I'm actually going to ask that our consultant, Mark Wendling, come up and give a brief explanation. Well, not brief, it can be as long as it needs to be, but as far as regarding ordinance number 20 and also the attachments that were provided to council and administration, just to give further explanation and try to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As you know, we've been conducting this study for a number of months. I had an opportunity to talk to each one of you and get your feedback, your input, as well as members of the community, the CIC, the Civil Service Commission, and very importantly, staff. So I think I gleaned a lot of really good information about the village and really what the village, the direction I think they would like to see the structure of the government go toward. The thing that became clear to me was, I think with almost 100% of the people I spoke to, some sort of municipal administrator was necessary on a day-to-day basis and desired. There was some variation as to whether that should be a municipal administrator, where the mayor would remain the strong mayor, would stay the ultimate say in hiring, firing decisions, or whether it should go more the council manager route. The recommendation that I put forward was to do a municipal administrator. The reason why I chose that route was because I felt like it was the bridge that could get you where you need to go. And it's something that you could evolve toward over a period of time if you wanted to go the full municipal manager route. That could be something you look to do 5, 8, 10 years from now. So what are the advantages of having a full-time professional administrator here on a day-to-day basis who's empowered to contract on behalf of the city, those sorts of things? First, I think you would look to consolidate the safety and service director positions into one position, and that would be the municipal administrator position. That person would essentially serve as the chief operating officer of the city, the chief administrative officer. They would be here on a daily basis. They would supervise staff. They would evaluate staff. That individual would, at times, unfortunately, have to discipline staff. Hopefully that's not very often, but it is at times necessary. The other thing that I think an administrator really provides you is someone that has a background in local government. It's a career they set out for. And it's something they've been trained to do, whether that be they came up as an assistant, or maybe they were a development manager somewhere, and they wanted to really be able to grab on to something and really see the fruits of their labors when they are able to redevelop a downtown, like St. Bernard. You've got a lot of great projects. You are in an ideal geographic location. There's just so much opportunity here. I think it would be an ideal position for someone who has that background and really wants to be able to put their expertise to work. The administrator could also handle the daily HR functions of the city. That's something that I have done throughout my career. I've done both development and HR. They would be the person who would negotiate the contracts with the various unions on behalf of the city. So I think right now the HR function is being handled by the auditor's office. Is that correct, Ms. Brickwood? Yeah. So that's something I think you could choose to transfer over to an administrator. I think there would be capacity for that. The administrator would also maintain accessibility. So you want to have someone that if there is a problem, they're here. Someone can come and talk to them. They can always get in touch with the mayor to help to resolve the problem. Someone the staff can talk to when they're on duty. Someone that the citizens can come in and see if they have a complaint or an issue or a concern. I think it really establishes a strong presence on a day-to-day basis. One of the things that I think is a challenge oftentimes for smaller communities is really developing the relationships in the region at the state level so that when you go up for an economic development project or you're competing for a major corporation that you're trying to get to come to town, who do you turn to? Who do you work with? It's important to have that relationship established with Ready Cincinnati, with Jobs Ohio. It's important to have that relationship established with Ohio Council, Kentucky, Indiana Council of Governments, the county itself. So an individual in this role would have the opportunity to really get out, would really be able to network, would really be able to expand the reach of St. Bernard and really promote St. Bernard. One of the things that they would probably look at would be to implement economic incentives, whether that would be a tax incentive, a tax increment financing district, a community reinvestment area zone, opportunity zones. Those are all things that someone with that background I think would really be able to benefit the community with. They would also manage the vendors. So if you contract for engineering services or other types of services, this individual would oversee that process, and the vendors would answer to the administrator. And as I said before, they would typically recruit, hire, evaluate the staff, and they would also work very closely with Ms. Stegman to prepare the agenda for the council meetings, possibly put together council letters on all the ordinances and all the various resolutions that you might have pending in front of you. So the administrator is sort of a jack of all trades. Typically they'll have an expertise in one or two areas, but they are kind of they're the individual that kind of ties everything else together. I know there's some other positions we also talked about, the Auditor and Treasurer position. Currently you've retained those in your charter as elected positions. Most charter communities do not have them as elected, and they're typically consolidated under a finance director. There would be some benefits to having a full-time finance director. First off, you would get someone with expertise in municipal finance. I think you're lucky right now that Peggy has a background there, but that's not always necessarily going to be the case. You don't have to have a background in accounting to be elected as the city auditor. The finance director would serve preferably as the village's chief financial officer. So even though that individual would work very closely with the administrator and would be appointed by the administrator with the consent of the mayor, it is something that they would be able to provide that expertise, interact with the auditor when they come. I think that's one of the major things. You have to have someone who speaks the language, and the auditor can be very, very challenging at times. The finance director would assist with the preparation of the annual budget and capital improvement projects. That would be one of their big roles. And they would provide accountability to the elected officials through the appointed administration. So I think a finance director doesn't necessarily, in a community this size, have to be full-time. There are communities that have part-time finance directors and operate very well with them. That would be a decision I think you'd have to make once you made the transition and once you had a full-time administrator on staff to figure out what those needs really are. And then the other major issue was the elected law director. I think the village has been pretty fortunate to have had people locally who could serve that role. That's not necessarily always going to be the case. In a small village, it might be hard to find someone with a background in municipal law. So if you went to an appointed law director, I think that would enable you to work with someone has that expertise in municipal or local government law. If they were firm, it would also give you a much deeper experience. So you would probably be able to get attorneys who had a background in real estate law. I think that's especially important when you're looking to redevelop certain parts of town, to have someone who can negotiate those contracts for you, who understands the development field and how it works. You'd also be able to get someone who had a background in labor law. So when you're dealing with unions or you've got a major disciplinary issue, it is really beneficial to have someone who can advise on that, who knows, what the pitfalls are, what you need to watch out for, and just what you have to comply with. And then again, I think that gives you accountability. Right now, with an elected law director, they're accountable to the people every election, but in the interim, if something happens, you may struggle with that accountability. This person would be accountable on a day-to-day basis. So those are the major things regarding the structure of the government. I'm open to any questions from anyone.
Mr. President,
Mr. Ray Culbertson.
I know we spoke 2 weeks ago about the whole city manager, city administrator, and you had said again today that the ultimate goal would be to get to a city manager, but we got to overcome that bridge. What do you mean by that bridge? Why is it not good now and it might be good in 4, 5, 6 years?
I guess because when I talked to different people, some people were in favor of an administrator, some were in favor of going the full council manager route. I didn't hear anyone that wanted to stay status quo. So to me, I think you really do need that daily supervision, that structure. And I felt like municipal administrator is something I think everyone can probably agree on in this moment in time. Going the full manager route is something I think you could look toward, but ultimately this is a decision that you have to make as an elected body.
Mr. President. Mr. Bob Culbertson. Thank you. So talking about the administrator, the one thing that makes me kind of cringe, and I know the mayor's currently in a 2-year left in his term, or 2.5, is sounds like everything's being appointed by the mayor. So my concern is in 2.5 years, if Jonathan, for whatever reason, not saying you will, don't wish it, but if he should lose the race, the new mayor could then come in and we could have mass turnover every time we have a mayor change, going the administrative route, because they're being appointed by the mayor, not appointed by council or approved by council.
Well, the way I've developed the document, they're appointed by the administrator with the consent and approval of the mayor. So you're not totally wrong, but I think it would be difficult for a mayor to come in and just start firing people left and right under the way that it's been written.
Mr. President,
Ms. Hausfeld.
I was concerned about that as well, but from what I read, to fire somebody, don't you have to have council's approval?
To fire the administrator, you have to have council's approval.
Okay, so if there was a turnover in mayor, sorry, Jonathan, the only way that would work, where a mayor would come in and be able to just let people go, is if that particular mayor had control of council too, correct?
In my opinion, yes, that's correct.
Mr. President. Okay. Just to follow up on that, one, but the mayor could come in and decide, we want a new CFO or financial director. They just couldn't replace the administrator without council's approval?
The way it's written, the administrator would hire and fire with the consent of the mayor. So I think it would be challenging for a mayor to come in and just decide they were going to clean house. That's my opinion.
Mr. President?
Ms. Hausfeld.
The way I just understood it, though, could a mayor come in and just get rid of the administrator?
No, not the way the charter amendment is written.
That has to have approval of council.
That has to have
And
approval of
the only way
council.
that could be is if the mayor also had control of council,
Yeah.
basically.
Mr. President, can I just ask one?
Quick.
Wasn't it discussed, and maybe this will help, that if we went to this form, that the other employees you're talking about would have a contract? They're not just going to be, they're not appointed, they're actually hired employees. So that was one of the other things, that they would be a hired employee. Am I correct? like, we're hiring employees, we're not, I mean, I know they use the word appoint, but the people here think it's appointed by a new mayor every time.
Sure, yeah,
So,
they
like,
would be
The
employees.
tax commissioner would be hired with a contract.
They wouldn't have a contract, but
Okay.
they would be an employee of the municipality.
Okay.
And so that any termination of that employee would have to go through the process.
So, like, with
Which would
cause.
typically take progressive discipline. There'd be a whole lot that would go into the process when you have a professional form of government.
Mr. President, so what about the hiring? Would that get approval of council?
Of the
If the mayor,
administrator?
yeah.
Yes. it
Okay, so
is.
if the mayor,
The mayor basically would do the interviews, would recommend the council would have to approve.
okay,
And it would be up to the mayor if he wanted to involve someone on council in the process, but it doesn't, hiring and firing requires the approval of the council.
and then there's two positions that I still don't have real clarity on.
Okay.
We have a tax commissioner and we have president of council or vice mayor. So where are they fitting in? I read about a tax commissioner or a tax administrator. That would be, I guess, hired by the finance.
It would ultimately be hired by the administrator.
Okay,
The way I have it structured, the tax administrator, the finance director would be the tax commissioner, which is pretty typical in most municipalities. And then there would be a tax administrator who would be the one who would actually oversee the day-to-day of the tax department.
okay. And then what about president of council? This
President
remains.
council is something that I think is up to you whether you would like to retain that position or not. Most charter communities do not have a president of council, but that's your flavor, whatever you would prefer.
Because I think what I read in here is that the meetings would be directed by the mayor. Council meetings would be directed.
If you went the full route.
Okay.
You know, there's two different, I think there's in front of you, essentially what you have pending are two different charter amendments. One would be the structure of Village Hall, the professional staff, and then the other would be the status of the elected officials. And council, and whether you wanted to keep wards, you wanted to go to elected all at large, whether you wanted to go to 4-year staggered terms. I think those are two separate issues for you to decide upon.
Mr. President,
Mayor Stuchel.
as far as a personal opinion on how our meetings run, kudos to you, Mr. President, as far as being able to maintain a decorum between administration and council. And I personally think having the mayor running the council meeting is not a grand idea. I think that having someone that is, off to the side enough between the two to keep, because there are obviously times where there's deliberation between council and the mayor. I think it'd be rather awkward, especially if the mayor is running the meeting, and if, I just think it's a conflict. I think that the president of council can maintain the necessary decorum between the two, especially if we're having a deliberation. I just think it would be rather awkward, just a personal opinion.
Mr. President.
Mr. Jaberke.
One thing on the administrative officer departments, it says council by a majority vote of its members. I would rather see like a 3/4 supermajority of its members, not just 5 people who could vote to get rid of somebody.
That is something you can certainly
Huh?
add to the ordinance to,
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I'd rather have,
that is something that can be added, that could be modified.
and then my workings throughout the city, probably 7,500 people came up and said, just rip the bandage off, just go straight to city manager or village administrator. Village manager said village administrator. They'd rather just see it go one full step instead of do this for a while, then maybe we'll change, maybe we won't. That was my 2 cents.
Mr. President,
Ms. Brickway.
what percent did you say, like 75%?
75 to 100 people talk to me.
Okay.
I didn't say percentage.
I will say my fear of that, I don't think it'll pass. Because all of the employees are petrified of the idea of a city manager right now. Because they hear what happens. So I'm just saying that that's why I said, well, if we did this and we did a baby step, I think it would be more accepted. I think that's too sharp and I mean, that's just my personal opinion, but I've heard from a lot of the employees and they will tell their families, and I don't think you have a chance of passing it if you do that. That's just from what I've heard. They're scared to death of a manager coming in here with no power, with not working with the mayor to do whatever he wants, and they don't trust a lot of people on council. I don't know how else to put that to, and it scares them. I don't know how else to say it.
Mr. President,
Mr. Brickley.
I kind of like what, the little bit I'm new, but what Mark's saying is, what I like is the city administrator is more of an initial step versus not locking into the city manager is kind of like full go, if you will, where it takes away the power of the mayor. And I think a lot of people in these meetings that we've had, I know I've been at one, the people really, really do like our strong mayor and our small town feel. That's why I like the idea of the city. I have to disagree with Don. I like the idea of a city administrator. As Mark was saying, if it starts gelling 2, 3, 4, 6, 8 years down the road, then go to the city manager, kind of, if that's what the people want. So I'm more in line with the city administrator is a test where our mayor stays a strong mayor, and versus locking into the city manager right off the get-go, which this is all new to us. So that's my feelings on that.
Mr. President.
Mr. DeBerke.
Well, Kurt, I disagree with you. We talked about town hall meetings, getting people together. When's that gonna happen? I think, to me, we got framework here. We don't know what the public wants. Now, I'm hearing one thing, Peggy's hearing something else. Before we put anything to gospel, I would think we should have town hall meeting stuff.
I would respectfully disagree with you on that, and here's why. One of the things that you're elected to do is to represent the people and to put these issues before them. I think if you take this to the entire community, it will be very difficult to ever get everyone to coalesce behind one thought. I think you have to take it to them, this is the proposal, and then you have to sell it. And that's when you have the town hall meetings. When you've put it on the ballot, I think you get together, you have the town forums, you explain why, the reasoning behind it, and you do what you have to do to sell it to the people and explain why this is a good thing, why this will benefit the village, why this will make things better. I would encourage them to look around. I mean, who would have ever thought the village of Silverton 20 years ago would be looking today like it does? I mean, it had a downtown that was faltering. Today, they've got a $40 million development. The old city hall is a brewery. They have a brand new city hall. Montgomery Road looks really vibrant. I think that that's something that an administrator can really help. I think St. Bernard is in a much better position than Silverton was 20 years ago, but I think there's just so much potential here, and I think you got to have somebody that can promote the village to the greater community. So I hear what you're saying, but I think that you have to represent it, you have to get behind it, and then you have to sell it.
Mr. President,
Bob Culbertson.
just a couple, or 2 questions. Just with Silverton, they're a city administrator versus city manager?
They are a city manager form.
Okay,
That is correct.
all right. And then the second thing, do you have an example of towns or villages that went from a strong mayor to a city administrator versus a strong mayor to a city managers that could kind of lead us an example of this is how they did it, this is things that they liked, maybe didn't like? You said Silverton's doing all these great things, but they got a city manager. So I'm just want to make sure
Sure.
we are doing the due diligence here before we just throw something out and then try to get behind it and promote it,
Sure.
you know, in November.
So I'll start with Silverton. Silverton, back in 1998, 99, went into fiscal watch. As it turned out, they came out of fiscal watch faster than any other community in the history of the state. The reason for that was they had money. They just didn't have anybody on staff who knew how to budget it properly. So they were paying every bill they got out of their general fund. The auditor allowed them to pay all of their municipal road expenses out of the municipal road fund on a one-time transfer. So a lot of that came about. When that happened, the community really rallied and wanted to get somebody on staff from a day-to-day basis that could serve that role, that could provide that professional oversight. When they first created the position, they called it municipal administrator. They did not call it city manager. I mean, to be fair, it was always a council manager form of government, but they wanted to transition, similar to what you're saying. They were afraid people would not vote for it if it was the full council manager form. So they called it an administrator initially. They changed it a year or two later. Other communities regionally, Springdale is a strong mayor form of government with a city administrator. It has worked there for probably 50 years. It's done very well for them. And you may have read recently they're getting ready to totally redevelop the Tri-County Mall. It's going to be a really interesting, exciting project, desperately needed in that community. But it is a form that served them well. Any form of government you go to is going to have its own set of challenges. You know, in the council manager form, sometimes that challenge can be a council. If a council becomes divided within itself, it can be very difficult for that manager. In the stronger mayor form, if you have a mayor and a manager who don't see eye to eye, that can be challenging in and of itself. So it just really kind of depends on the community and the political culture of that community. Another community that recently has evolved away from a statutory form is Deer Park. They are going the full council manager route, but that is something that they went to, I think, beginning of this year. But that is something I think they've been thinking about for a very long time.
Mr. President,
And Mr. Schulmer.
one of the things you didn't mention, I don't think, was changing the composition of council. Do you have any feedback on that as to why you're recommending that particularly?
Sure,
I think you mentioned the other things.
Yeah, I mean, I think St. Bernard is a small enough community that you're never going to have a situation where a certain neighborhood's not going to be represented. Everyone knows everybody in St. Bernard. So it would be really hard to say, you're not my ward, I don't have to worry about you. I think that by going to an all at-large system, you would be able to probably get greater diversity within the community, meaning not necessarily ethnic diversity, although that might be part of it, but just you wouldn't have to worry about, do I have someone who wants to run in this ward? For example, in Fairfield, where I used to work, we had Ward 1. We had to search for someone almost every election to run in that ward, even though it was a ward of about 10,000 people. It could be very difficult at times to find someone to fill that ward seat. So that's really what is the primary aim behind that part. And then one of the other things I did talk about was going to 4-year staggered elections. What I see in that is it provides continuity between administrations, between councils. So you're not going to have all of council voted out potentially all at one time. You're going to have some continuity between councils, and I think that brings about greater stability in City Hall.
Mr. President,
Mr. Schulmer.
so I've talked to some people, not 75, but maybe 10, and that is the one thing that the people I've talked to would disagree with. They want one person that represents them, and then as a sidebar, there are concerns that that at times council can be more of a popularity contest than it should be already, and that would make it worse. So that's one area I guess I would disagree. I would also pretty strongly disagree that we shouldn't poll the public before we do this. One thing I hate is when a politician tries to tell me what's good for me and sell me without asking me. I think that would be a mistake for us to do that.
Mr. President,
Ms. Prickwick.
I'm going to make 2 comments here. First of all, the public does get an opinion. They vote. I mean, you can put this on a ballot, and if they don't want it, they vote it no. I find that, I mean, I did it once, and they voted it down. But you are elected to make decisions, and this is a decision, and then you see if the citizens want it, and if they don't, they vote no. I was at your meeting, it was a good meeting, but it's the same people that come to every single meeting. We didn't really have a lot more extra people than normal, and that's probably exactly, and we all know that that's the way our meetings go. It's the same 20 or 30 people. But, and I can just see all the arguing, and I mean, arguing going on, because that's what usually happens at those meetings. But they do, the public does get a say, and I'm going to be very adamant about this. Wards, I was Ward 2 for 8 years. I worked in every other ward, half the time than my ward, and my husband, he used to tease me about that. And the idea that in the last, 3, 4 elections, almost every ward ran unopposed. We're not giving how do we say we're giving the residents a say when you can't even give them 2 people to vote for? That is, here's your person and that's who you're gonna get, and we all know it's not gonna get any better. There's no way it's gonna get better staying at wards. It's gonna be the same people walking in and just having a job. And I just think that is, I ran unopposed once and I hated it, because I felt like I didn't even deserve to be there because the people didn't even really pick me. And so I just think with the small community, you can work all over. Like I said, I did plenty of stuff for other wards than I would the particular ward, but I just think it's a shame that we have so many unopposed seats. That's just my opinion.
Mr. President,
Mr. Schulmeyer.
I'd like to respectfully disagree with all that. You know, I think the reason that we've had positions run unopposed in the last couple of years has a lot more to do with the fact that we don't have 2 parties anymore than it does to do with people not getting a choice. I think if people thought that Ray wasn't doing a good job, they'd run against him. I think they think he's doing a great job, so they don't feel the need for that. The reason I didn't run when Kelly was in my wards because he was doing a great job, and if I had a problem, I would call him, and he would go fix it. I also really disagree that we should make decisions without asking the public what they think. I think that's a mistake. I don't think my job is to make the decision for them and hope they vote for it. This is too important. I want to know what they think so that it does pass, not hope what I think is what they want and have it pass or fail.
Mr.
That's my
President.
opinion.
Ms. Brickwick.
I get what you're saying about asking people, but anybody correct me if I'm wrong. Have we not been talking about this for about at least 10 years? At least?
Mr. President?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know, I
Mr.
mean, I
Bob
brought it
Courtson.
up a few years ago,
I-
and I think, you know, where I'm a little, is the manager, I'm hearing a lot of people say, go to city manager route. So I don't want to put a city administrator out there and then it fail, and then think, oh shoot, we should have went the manager route because people went that, versus going the manager route, and to your point, Peggy, people have said that we should have went the administrator
Yeah,
route. Because, right or wrong, I have a group of people that talk to me, feel comfortable, and there might be a larger audience that only see me on TV, and, you know, and don't come up to approach me, that might feel more comfortable coming to a town hall, but I do agree to your point. Typically, those town halls are the same.
I mean, I'm sorry, Mr. President,
Ms.
and
Brickwick.
they are, and that's where, I would never say not ask the public, because God knows I'm the one that's always asking the public. But what I'm saying is, we've all been discussing this for over 10 years. I think we all kind of know what the public wants. And then we finally hired a professional. We didn't hire a political person. We hired a professional to go out and look. He talked to multiple other city managers and city administrators to come up with it. So that just, you know, but I think my biggest fear is the next election, if we don't get this by the next one, this city is going to be in a tough place, because I know there's multiple people that are not going to be running. So what are you going to do if you don't have people running for certain positions and you have not got this straightened out? Now, if you want to postpone it from the November ballot, which I don't agree on, you could have a special election, which the people hate even more, and it costs money, but that's an option you could do. If you're willing to do that and spend like 10 or 15,000 for a special election, you could. That's what the nice thing about the November one is, you know, we don't have to pay for it, and pretty much everybody goes out to vote in November. But I am just going to say this. I've watched people move to wards when they know they're going to run unopposed. And I think your point of not having political parties actually goes the opposite way. I ran on my own. I was the first one independent, and I had to pay for everything. When you have a party, they pay for everything. They do all your bookkeeping for you and all that. They make it easy. When you go out and try to get people to run independently, it freaks them out. Like, oh my God, how am I going to do it? That's one reason I helped Patty do it, to show her how to do it. So yeah, the political party, they do the hard work. They do a lot of the work for you, and they pay for a lot of your stuff too. So if we're not going to have political parties, it's just going to get worse. It's not better.
Mr. President.
President.
Oh, I'm
Ms.
sorry.
Bettinghouse.
It's okay.
Go ahead.
Well, Mr. President, I understand what you're saying. I've not been talking about this for 10 years. In fact, I've had about 2 discussions on this. One was when you interviewed me, and another one was probably just people talking about we should do this. So this is new to me, and I'm hearing concerns from people about making a drastic change. And I think the question will be, if we have been talking about it for 10 years, why are we rushing it in the last month and a half? That's just my opinion. I think we have public meetings on things far smaller and less important than this all the time. Again, I think it's a mistake to not ask people what they think.
Mr. President,
Mr. DeBerke.
if we decide to put this on the ballot, this is going to be one vote for everything, or is it going to be separated out to 4 or 5
I would
different?
recommend you separate it out into at least two different ballot initiatives. One would be the structure of City Hall. I think that has to be on one initiative. I think it would be very difficult to do the administrator but not address the auditor and treasurer positions and the law director. I think those all need to be in one amendment. The other part could be in a separate amendment. It could be in multiple amendments if you wanted it to be. Or you could just decide not to address the other part at all right now. In my opinion, the most important thing I think that you're facing right now is the structure of City Hall. And I think that's what probably really needs the bulk of your attention right now. If you wanted to defer the other part to later, I think that would be, you could do that. It would not be the end of the world.
Mr. President,
Mr. DeBerke.
so you're saying one for the structure of City Hall, but could you have, like, if somebody wants to keep law director as elected, not appointed?
You could do that. I don't recommend
What I'm
it.
saying, if we do it all in one thing, we're gonna do the manager, administrator, whatever, the chief financial officer, and the law director, all as one vote, yes on all three at once.
That's
Could
what
that-
I would recommend.
We could, that could sink the ship if people want to keep an elected.
It could. I think that it's very difficult for an administrator to come in when they don't actually have control over those areas of the city, how the city functions.
Mr. President.
Hold on a second. Did Ms.
Mis-
Bettingham? did you-
Mr. President.
Ms. Bettingham.
Mark, I just have a question for you in your analysis. You did state in here that if the village decides to pursue the recommendations of the analysis, it would be beneficial to conduct a comprehensive survey of the community. And so you suggested a couple things, Survey Monkey, and then you suggested there's a couple other ways to do that. So that, I thought you were recommending that we do survey and get the opinion of the people before we
I
take
think
it.
that is something you can certainly do.
Okay.
I think that would take time.
Yeah.
I don't really like the Survey Monkey, and the reason why I'm not a big fan of Survey Monkey is I think it's very difficult to get validated results from that. If you wanted to go the other route, my preference for you would be University of Cincinnati's Rademacher Center, or Eric Rademacher is the director, but that's not free. But they do a very good job. Miami University does something similar. They typically deal more with townships. That one typically, at least it used to be free. I don't know if it still is, but you do have to get on their schedule, and that could take a while. So there are a couple different options for you if you wanted to survey the community. I think the community survey would be valuable in just finding out what are people's how do they feel about the village right now? It doesn't even necessarily have to be specifically about this issue. It could be, what do you see as the village's strengths? What do you see as its challenges? What would you like to see happen in the village over the next, short term, medium term, long term?
Mr. President,
Mr. DeBerke.
no, I'll get laughed out of here, but what is Survey Monkey? I'm an old man, I don't do computers much.
It's a tool that you can use. It's online, and just about anyone can develop a Survey Monkey program and push it out to the public. You can do it via email. There are just a number of different mechanisms that you can use to push it out there. But again, the problem is you're not really using anyone who has that expertise in how to develop a validated survey. So when I say validated, basically you're surveying enough people in the community that you're going to get a result that would withstand legal scrutiny. So I think that's what's important if you're going to do a survey, that you can say this is a true representation of the opinion of the community at large.
Mr. President,
Ms. Brickway.
I do have a couple suggestions, maybe. It sounds like you really want to have some meetings. So what I would, the first suggestion is you could put this on, you could vote on tonight, the first reading, and have meetings in between. It's going to take to August, so you'd have meetings in between, and you could change it or table it or do whatever you want, or just do a special election. I mean, but just remember, people they don't like that, but if it's that strong that we want to have some town hall meetings, I would suggest doing one or the other.
Mr. President,
Sorry, go ahead.
I think we need to do what we have to do to get it on for November. I hate the idea of any special election because of the limited numbers, nothing to do with the finances of it. That stinks too. But anytime you have that special election, it's like you're sneaking something through on people. That's the general feeling. You know, we'll leave that to the schools. Well, we won't even get into that. But I'd be opposed to a special election. But, you know, we talk about, I too am in favor of having public meetings, but then, why can't we call special council meetings, and if we have to, before committee of the whole, and, you know, give it its 3 readings? There's things we can do and still have it for November. But I do not want to exclude the community from at least having the opportunity. You know how well the meetings went for the property down at the shopping square. You know, we had the biggest turnouts we've ever had for those meetings. So people are interested and they're following, and I think we owe them the opportunity to speak to us.
Ms. Housefeld.
To get it on November ballot, when do we have to have this passed by?
Mr. President, it was my understanding, I thought it was the 10th that we had to have it delivered, by August 10th, delivered to the Board of Elections.
That sounds correct. It's 90 days before the date of the election. And if I could just add, you could do the primary. That's not a special election. If you, for some reason, decide you didn't want to do the general this fall, you have the primary in the spring. I would argue that, again, you do get more issue-oriented voters at the primary, whereas at the general, you get a much broader swath of the community. The general is always the election that I've always preferred to put an issue on the ballot, because I think you're just more likely to get more voters. But
I'm going to bring up one thing. Ms. Brickwig said something before that jarred my memory. I was obviously not at the committee of the whole for the presentation, but I did watch it on TV. And Ms. Neeson came up, and are we going to have any conflicts? Marge's opinion was that they were elected as the Charter Commission, that they are still in place until they are voted out by another one. I'm just asking the question before we get too far in. You know, lawsuit, anything like that that's going to hinder what we're trying to do. Is that election commission still valid? It was brought up at the committee of the whole, and it just, when Peggy said something about a good meeting, it reminded me that Ms. Neeson was here, and her opinion at the time was that they were elected back when we first did the charter, and as far as she was concerned, that they were still elected until there was another charter commission and they were voted out. I'm just throwing it out so we don't go to all this work and have it all backfire on us.
Mr. President?
Ms. Housefeld.
I know she was on the original one, but I remember attending a meeting that Mayor Estep had, and he had some sort of a committee together too, so.
But
That
Ms.
committee wasn't
Neeson
valid?
was saying that correct. They were elected back when we first did the charter, and that was her contention at the meeting. I'm just, like I say, throwing it out so that we don't do all this work for naught.
Mr. President?
Hold on. Mr. Ray Culbertson.
Yeah, I remember that too, and at that time, the Mayor Estep just had his own committee to try to move forward, but Marge argued then that the Charter Commission was still in effect, and she brought the whole list of the signatures, if I remember. We tried to make out the names on who was on her little on her little forms, and she claims that that's still the governing body of the charter, because it's never been changed.
Mr. President?
Ms. Brickway.
Her chart, I don't know how to say this nicely, a lot of them have passed away, and a lot of them have moved out of town. So I don't even see how.
Just
she could-
asking the
she-
question.
Yeah, I know what you're saying, but I'm saying even if she thinks she has one, there's probably only
That part of the
4
meeting,
people left.
that needs to be addressed,
Yeah.
so that something doesn't go
Mr.
wrong.
President, we did
Mr.
actually contract with legal counsel to review this, and that individual is guided through the process as well, as far as with our consultant, Mark. So that was addressed in their recommendation on how to do this.
Okay, I just didn't hear any
But
yay or
if that,
nay at the committee of the
if
whole
there's a
meeting when I
disagreement
watched
on
it.
that, then that's fine. But we did have that was addressed.
But she was not answered at the meeting, so I thought that was still in limbo, so.
To your point, Mr. President, the charter does not have any provision for a charter commission at all currently. It doesn't exist. And according to the legal counsel, Mr. Pacheco, that Mayor Stuchel was referring to, it's something that would have to be a part of the charter. I can't answer that. I'm not an attorney, but I suspect what happened was once they did their work was done. That is something, if you wanted follow-up opinion, you could certainly seek that. And there is a provision within the Ohio Revised Code that does enable you to submit, as a council, issues to the ballot. So you don't have to have a charter commission in order to do it.
And Mr. President,
Ms. Brickwick.
and I put something on the ballot. And when I did that, I can't remember how long ago that was, but it was to make it 4-year terms. And I had talked to the Board of Elections, and I just had to get signatures to put it on the ballot. That was it.
Anyone else? Is there anyone in the audience that has any questions?
Mr. President,
Mr. Unger.
just wondering, I see all the positions that, they want to change. Has anyone done a cost analysis to determine how much this is going to help or hurt the finances of the city or village?
Mr. President,
Mr. DeBerke.
any clue what chief finance officer and village administrator, village manager would demand in salary?
Well, a village manager would depend
$5?
on what level of experience you wanted. I think you're probably looking anywhere from $100,000 to $130,000 a year for a village manager or administrator, if you wanted someone with some pretty deep experience. The finance director, in my opinion, could be part-time, so you would have to decide, what you think that is worth. You're probably looking around $60,000 a year would be my guess. Here's what I would tell you. The position should pay for itself, ultimately. That is the goal when you bring in a manager, administrator, or finance director. They should be doing work that ultimately they are bringing in money that you weren't going to get otherwise, and that position should pay for itself multiple times. So that's what a good manager, administrator, good finance director is going to do for you.
Mr. President.
I agree with you 100%. I've been fighting for this since I've been up here.
Mr. President.
Mayor Stuchel.
So originally, in this calendar year's budget, I had allotted funds to actually hire an economic development director because we don't have it. We don't have that representation. And the current structure, and this is no disrespect for Mr. Paul because he has handled everything that he's been tasked to do very well. But as far as we don't have anyone currently within City Hall to represent us at the table within Hamilton County, we are missing out. So basically, having the funds that we had already originally looked at budgeting for a separate position, we're wrapping this all into one, which I do believe would be more effective. Again, having somebody that can handle the economic development, the HR, handling the budgets and all of that, and having one individual that you would answer to. So I do think it would be well worth, and I don't really believe that we would be above and beyond where we are within our current budget. And that can also be mainstreamed more so with respect to the village administrator who would totally be responsible for managing that.
Mr. President,
Ms. Housel.
along the same line, as far as having a law director elected versus a firm hired, what ballpark are we looking?
I think it depends a lot upon what you expect of your law director. So not every community has their law director at their council meetings. I think you'd have to make a decision about that. I mean, my recommendation would be have your law director at your council meetings. And I think that also comes down to you would go out to bid for those services, and you wouldn't necessarily base it as a professional service on the lowest bid, but you would want to see their qualifications. There are certain firms around town that really specialize in municipal law. You're probably going to get within the range. You're not going to get a broad range. I don't know what that figure is, honestly. But again, I think that similar to the manager, having those individuals available to you, having a deep bench to rely upon really makes everything else easier. And when I say easier, I mean more expeditious. It makes development easier to accomplish, easier to do. A lot of what you'll have to do in St. Bernard is assemble properties. That is a very difficult, it can be a very tedious process. So those are things that having that legal expertise can really benefit you when you're going down that road.
Mr. President,
Mr. DeBerke.
Valerie, just put you on the spot here. I know there's in the budget, was it 70,000, something like that, approximately, for outside legal?
Mr. President, we actually took it down this year, so
Okay.
I'm not really sure, but that's what I was just gonna say, that I've been asked this question, and I said you would have to look at more than just a salary there, because we have all the different professional service line items that we use, and so there's a lot more than just a salary there. But I think we took professionals down to 25 this year.
Approximately how many hours a week, a month,
It
can you figure?
depends.
Oh, come on.
Mr. President, it depends. It depends on what you're asking me to do. I field phone calls that I don't necessarily, report on. I get inquiries from people. That's not necessarily something that needs to be responded to or brought before council. So it really just depends. If we're working on legislation, like I spent a bazillion hours on the anti-discrimination ordinance that ultimately came to not quite as much as some of us had hoped. But, if I'd have made more money an hour working at Wendy's based on the hours I put into something like that. And then there are just questions that come up. It does take me time to research the, but the other thing you have to look at is, not just what I do, but also the firm just because you hire somebody who maybe has some municipal law background, doesn't mean you're not going to ultimately need outside counsel for other things that we may have to pay for. And I'm not talking about things that are covered by insurance, but there are other issues that you have to do as well. I don't know what it would cost on a year basis, frankly.
A lot of it would depend on what types of projects you have going on, how much legal counsel you really require to get that project done. I would tell you, some years in the communities I've worked in, the legal budget the costs have been a lot higher than others, just based upon those sorts of things, or even lawsuits that you may get involved in. So
Mr. President.
It varies.
Sorry.
Ms. Van Valken.
For example, when Curtis was law director and the Bank Avenue issue was running hot and heavy for months and months and months, he spent hours and hours and hours away from his private practice, consulting with the consultants, working very closely with the outside counsel that was on that, because it was an environmental issue. It required specialized counsel that cost much more than your run-of-the-mill attorney might do, and I'm not insulting any of us that way, but he spent, just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours over months of time dealing with things like that. It really is often dependent, as the gentleman said, depends on what's going on.
You would likely have a retainer for basic services, and that would be set on an annual basis. But other things might cost more, and I think you currently have that situation when you have to get outside counsel. So.
All right, anyone else? Thank you very much. Good. All right. Still your report, Mayor?
So before I read, my report, the next step as well is making a decision as to what direction the council proposes to go. So whether or not we move forward, whether or not, for the goal of this fall, or whether or not it be, special election, whether or not it be, moving to the spring. So that somehow has to be kind of decided as to whether or not, we move forward with, putting the proposed ordinance on the table, or whether or not that's postponed, but one direction has to be decided, just because time is of the essence, if indeed it seems imperative to do something for fall. If not, then, the decision can be made as to somewhere along the calendar year as to what they wish to do, either special or spring.
May I make a suggestion? If council votes to put it on the table tonight and give it its first reading, you discuss it at committee of the whole, get everybody's feel at committee of the whole, and then you either suspend the second and third reading in July, or you have a special meeting if you wanted to go all three, but at least that way it'll be discussed at committee of the whole, and nobody has to make a decision tonight not to do it. That way we could give it the first reading and then discuss it a little more, or give the council 2 weeks to think about it. Just a suggestion. See, you might not have thought of that if you were sitting up here.
So, Mr. President, I was never proposing that I sit in that seat.
I'm just kidding.
No. Okay.
It's a rented seat for a couple
Got
more meetings.
So, Mr. President, can I finish my report?
You may.
No, I'm kidding. Thank you. Thank you again for taking the time to consider the recommendations by our consultant, Mark Wendling. As you've probably already heard of the increased police responses to the village of Elmwood Place, I have started some dialogue with their mayor and council about the need to address their current situation so that it is no longer a burden to our department and community. I will keep you all informed as to how this progresses, but there are some options that could be explored where we could potentially go under contract to provide service to their village. Something has to be done, and if we are already responding because of our mutual aid agreement, then we might as well explore some options of how we can be compensated just as we did for emergency medical services. So there is at least some dialogue being discussed there. Chief Simos and I met with representatives from the St. Bernard Elmwood Place school system regarding the establishment of a school resource officer position. We will be moving to partner with the district to establish the position where they would pay for approximately 75% of the officer's compensation and benefits. A draft of a contract is currently underway, and for both parties to review, and then it will be presented to council as well. This is a much-needed position, and I could not be more grateful for the district in their willingness to partner on this. I'd also like to be put on the agenda at the next COW to discuss this further, and also the possibility of an MOU to adjust the compensation of the lower step employees at the service department. Lastly, mark your calendars now for the big grand opening celebration on Saturday, June 25th at 3 p.m. at the community garden. There will be light refreshments and a chance to meet your fellow gardeners and residents. This evening, I just had a meeting with the Community Garden Club, and they would love to have members of council come to see how this has progressed. St. Bernard Garden Club is truly proud of what they have done and would love to see anyone come see how this project has actually come to fruition and the plants are actually truly growing. Thank you. That concludes my report.
Mr. President.
Thank you. Mr. Bob Culbertson.
Jonathan, you were talking about the mutual aid and their contract. How's the fire going? I know we entered in an agreement. They were paying per run. I've seen articles about their financial situation. Are we, any concerned about that?
Mr. President,
Mayor Stuchel.
as far as the fire situation, I mean, we are being paid. They are paying their bills. But what I would rather do is the fact that, again, on the fire side, again, just for EMS responses, we actually are in the process of looking at even seeing how we could potentially benefit their community and ours as a whole, which could benefit us in as far as from a manpower situation. Basically, what the village is receiving from St. Bernard is, a full response, basically a full complement when there's a fire. So we're there even when it comes to putting the fire out. But again, that's based on the mutual aid agreement. Same thing on the police side. When they can't make a response or they're not able, we're responding. The mutual aid agreement, basically, I don't say requires it, but we make ourselves available. That's what any good neighbor would do. So basically, at this point, if we can work out a way that, based on the fact that they did just pass, a levy for safety services, if we could look at their overall budget, what that they have already in their general fund for safety services and what they're getting on the levy, there might be some way that it could benefit both communities. So it's at least worth the option of developing some type of dialogue at this point, instead of just continuing to make the responses and not receiving anything. The mutual aid agreement does not allow for us to charge. The only way that we can be compensated is to go under contract for some type of service like we did for EMS responses. So what I am looking at, and again, obviously that doesn't mean it can move forward, but at least developing a dialogue to say, look, if we're already there, what would it take for us to just take over I'm not talking about taking over Elmwood, but taking over policing the community, and if we would charge them for it, if you could come up with what the proper amount of coverage that's needed based on manpower, and if we already are having that, we might as well be paid. So again, doesn't mean it would be anything that is a definite, but at least discuss it, because again, we're not being compensated for what we're having to do.
Mr. President.
Are we gonna keep
I
talking
just-
about this, or it's on the
Yeah, I was
committee of the
just
whole
gonna follow up.
agenda? It seems
I was
kinda,
just gonna, okay.
all
go
right,
ahead.
we're out of order here, but go ahead.
Okay. No, I was just wondering, from a staffing perspective, are we running the risk with having our police and fire in Elmwood responding to not having enough coverage in the village?
Mr. President,
Mayor Stucci.
real quick, we're already there anyhow because of the mutual aid agreement. We're already there. So regardless of my conversations, we're already there. If there's a run right now, we're already going to be there. So I might as well talk about it to at least establish some type of working schedule to see what we can do to correct the situation.
Mr. President, I have a different
Could-
question,
could-
okay?
Could we save this for old business, though, so we
Okay.
can continue with the agenda? Thank you. You're finished then? That's what I thought you said. All right. Auditor, Ms. Brickway.
Thank you, Mr. President. You're not going to like this, but sorry. I would like to suggest, before you even put that ordinance 20 on the table, that I don't think it would take that long to ask everybody their opinion, because all we're doing is pushing it 2 more weeks down the road that we have no idea what we're doing. So at least Jonathan might have a feeling of what you want to do, if we should have some public meetings set up in the meantime. I don't want to see us waste another 2 weeks waiting to discuss something again. I understand the first reading. I mean, that makes sense. But I think everybody out there probably has a sense of kind of what they want. And you can do it at the reading of, when you read Ordinance 20. But I think it would at least give him some insight of where he should progress to. Now I will read my report. The Auditor's Office has prepared Ordinance 19, 2022 for tonight's meeting. This ordinance transfers $700,000 from general fund transfer out, with $400,000 going into general bond retirement cash account and $300,000 going into the employee health plan cash account. It also provides the additional appropriation of $4,000 to the Bureau of Inspection. And as I reported last time, that's because they've increased our amount for our audit, partially due to all the COVID funding and doing new reports for that. And then it's also into computer systems for $9,900, and as was reported at the Committee of the Whole by Tommy Paul, it's to buy an additional year of the GoDaddy, so hopefully we can lock in a good price. And that concludes my report.
Thank you. Director of Law, Ms. Van Valkenburg.
Thank you. You were asking, Mr. President, about the Charter Commission matter. I have not seen if the report from, if there is an, in fact, official opinion from outside counsel. I would be happy to review that if there is, and report back to council if that continues to be a question. Otherwise, I have no report at this time. I would like to go into executive session at the end of the meeting, at the end of this very long meeting, and I do apologize, but I would like to do that to talk about ongoing litigation, the Matthews matter, the Norton advertising matter, and the Ms. Kunkel matter. Thank you.
Thank you. Treasurer, Mr. Unger.
Thank you, Mr. President. This evening, I have the statement from First State Bank. Our balance there as of May 31st, 2022 totals $5,666.99. And that concludes my report.
Thank you. Safety and Service Director, Mr. Paul.
Thank you, Mr. President. In the famous word of my dear friend Wally St. Clair, progress. To my community, I mentioned to you in the past about the pantry of the mind. Many of us forget to take stock of the things that keep us healthy. I noticed that a can of Care was about to expire. This needs to be replenished. How is it possible that Care became a hard-to-find item? All that I could find is a large jar of Love and Care. Now you wonder, will that go to waste? I don't think so, because sharing is caring. And if sharing is caring, then if you share, you will restock the shelves of the universe with Care again. Besides, a box of I don't care can be quite costly. That concludes my report.
Thank you. Tax Administrator, Ms. Helms.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just quickly, recap of May's tax revenues. The tax collections for May were $677,519. The refunds for May were $15,811. Delinquent tax collected with capital recovery was $954. Delinquent tax collected with the Ohio Attorney General's office was $31,324. And taxes paid through the e-file portal were $2,781. That concludes my report.
Thank you. We'll move to reports of standing committees. Finance, Mr. DePerky.
I have no report, but I'd like to make a motion, go into executive session at the end of the meeting for ongoing litigation.
I'll second that, Mr. President.
A motion by Mr. DePerky, seconded by Ms. Hausfeld, to go into executive session at the end of the meeting for pending litigation. Clerk, will you please call the roll on the motion?
Mr. Tuberky?
Aye.
Mr. Brickwig?
Aye.
Ms. Hausfeld?
Aye.
Mr. Bob Culbertson?
Aye.
Ms. Bettinghouse?
Aye.
Mr. Ray Culbertson?
Aye.
And Mr. Schildmeyer.
7 ayes, no nays, motion carries. Council will go into executive session to discuss pending litigation at the end of this meeting. Safety, Mr. Brickwig.
Thank you, Mr. President. Tonight, I'd like to read the monthly report for the fire department for the month of May. The fire incidents, structure fires were 5, other fires 2, vehicle fires 0, auto accidents 7, hazmat incidents 2, service calls 6, fire alarms 7, CO alarms 0, EMS assist 19 for a total of 48. As far as mutual aid given in fire, we had 2 to Norwood, 7 to Elmwood, 1 to Laughlin, and 1 to Marymount. As far as mutual aid received in fire runs, no mutual aid received. On the EMS side, the EMS incidents, we have 56 transports, 39 non-transports, so they had 39 runs that they did not transport the patient, for a total of 95 EMS runs. EMS mutual aid given, Elmwood 2 runs to Elmwood, and Norwood 4 runs EMS. Elmwood Place contract incidents, there were 14, so 14 contracted. And mutual aid received, we had EMS 1 mutual aid received from Laughlin. Also, the annual hose testing has been completed, and diversity training has been conducted for all members, and that concludes my report.
Thank you. Service, Ms. Hausfeld.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have a couple reports tonight. The Village of St. Bernard diverted 421.15 tons and achieved a 15.3% diversion rate for 2021. Our community will receive a direct deposit check in the amount of $6,801.94, and that was from the Hamilton County R3 source. The next one is the waste collection fee for the month of April was $28,787.61. And then I also have the report for the service department from May 2022. There were 36 trucks placed at residence, 22 dumpsters placed at residence, 136 special pickups at residence, 227.96 tons of garbage taken to the landfill. And as far as the recycling report, there was 33.840 tons of recycling material, 148 pounds of scrap aluminum, 69 pounds of aluminum cans, 175 car batteries, wow, 17 pounds of brass, 22 pounds of cast iron, 10 pounds of copper, and 400,000 pounds, 400,000 pounds of scrap metal. That concludes my report.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Public improvements, Mr. Bob Culbertson.
Thank you, Mr. President. CIC will meet this Tuesday at 6 o'clock in council chambers. That concludes my report.
Thank you. Laws, contracts, and claims, Ms. Bettinghouse.
No report.
Thank you. Marketing, Mr. Ray Culbertson.
Thanks, Mr. President. There will be a pre-sale of the German luau merchandise on Thursday, June 30th, from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. at the main office at City Hall. So please mark your calendars now for this year's luau event, which will take place on Friday, August 5th, from 5 p.m. to 11 p.m., and Saturday, August 6th, from 3 p.m. to 11 p.m. That concludes my report.
Thank you. Business and Industry, Mr. Schulmer.
No report, Mr. President.
Thank you. Committee of the Whole, Ms. Stegman.
Mr. President, the minutes were submitted on Tuesday, whatever date that was.
Okay. Thank you. All right, Clerk, are there any communications this evening?
Mr. President, there are no communications.
Thank you. Could you please give the first reading of ordinance number 18, 2022, please?
Ordinance number 18, 2022, an ordinance approving the editing and inclusion of certain ordinances as part of the various component codes of the codified ordinances of St. Bernard, Ohio, revising the traffic, general offenses, and fire prevention codes to comply with state law and declaring an emergency.
Members of council, you've heard the first reading of ordinance number 18, 2022. What is your pleasure?
Mr. President,
Ms. Bettinghouse.
make a motion to suspend with the second and third reading of ordinance number 18, 2022.
I'll second that, Mr. President.
A motion by Ms. Bettinghouse, seconded by Ms. Hausfeld to suspend the second and third reading of ordinance number 18, 2022. Are there any remarks?
Mr. President,
Mr. Taberky.
Valerie, add to your workload the fire prevention code. It's got a part about fireworks definition. I know the state of Ohio has changed the law on fireworks. A lot of fireworks going off and people are complaining. Does our law still?
I'm gonna have to take a look at that. I can get back, I'll have that back for you.
Thank
I'll look
you.
at it this weekend.
Well, we get next committee
Yes.
whole now. Thank you.
Any other remarks? Is there anyone in the audience wishing to address council on ordinance 18? Not, clerk, will you please call the roll on suspension?
Mr. Taberky?
Aye.
Mr. Rickwig?
Aye.
Ms. Hausfeld?
Aye.
Mr. Bob Culbertson?
Aye.
Ms. Bettinghouse?
Aye.
Mr. Ray Culbertson?
Aye.
And Mr. Schildmeyer.
7 ayes, no nays, motion carries. Members of council, what is your pleasure on adoption?
Mr. President,
Ms. Bettinghouse?
I make a motion to adopt ordinance number 18, 2022.
I'll second that.
A motion by Ms. Bettinghouse, seconded by Mr. Ray Culbertson to adopt ordinance 18, 2022. Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Taberky?
Aye.
Mr. Rickwig?
Aye.
Ms. Hausfeld?
Aye.
Mr. Bob Culbertson?
Aye.
Ms. Bettinghouse?
Aye.
Mr. Ray Culbertson?
Aye.
And Mr. Schildmeyer.
7 ayes, no nays, motion carries. Ordinance number 18, 2022 is adopted as read. Clerk, will you please give the first reading of ordinance number 19, 2022?
Ordinance number 19, 2022, authorizing and directing the auditor to transfer funds and provide additional appropriations and declaring an emergency.
Members of council, you've heard the first reading of ordinance number 19, 2022. What is your pleasure?
Mr. President,
Ms. Bettinghouse?
make a motion to suspend with the second and third reading of ordinance number 19, 2022.
Second that, Mr. President.
A motion by Ms. Bettinghouse, seconded by Ms. Hausfeld to suspend with the second and third reading of ordinance number 19, 2022. Are there any remarks? Not, is there anyone in the audience wishing to address council on ordinance 19? Not, clerk, will you please call the roll on suspension?
Mr. Taberky?
Aye.
Mr. Rickwig?
Aye.
Ms. Hausfeld?
Aye.
Mr. Bob Culbertson?
Aye.
Ms. Bettinghouse?
Aye.
Mr. Ray Culbertson?
Aye.
And Mr. Schildmeyer.
7 ayes, no nays, motion carries. Members of council, what is your pleasure on adoption?
Mr. President,
Ms. Bettinghouse?
make a motion to adopt ordinance number 19, 2022.
I'll second that.
A motion by Ms. Bettinghouse, second by Mr. Ray Culbertson to adopt ordinance number 19, 2022. Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Taberky?
Aye.
Mr. Rickwig?
Aye.
Ms. Hausfeld?
Aye.
Mr. Bob Culbertson?
Aye.
Ms. Bettinghouse?
Aye.
Mr. Ray Culbertson?
Aye.
And Mr. Schildmeyer.
7 ayes, no nays, motion carries. Ordinance number 19, 2022 is adopted as read. Members of council, what is your pleasure on ordinance number 20?
Mr. President,
Mr. Taberky?
I'd rather hold off till at least committee of the whole, see if we get a town hall meeting going before then or right after that, because it hasn't been placed on the table yet.
right.
Mr. President,
Mr. Schultmar?
so I'm, just want to make sure I understand. Do we need to do that to put it on the table tonight in order to, even if we have town halls, make it by August 10th?
Mr. President, we have special meetings.
It's already on the agenda for the 14th.
Mr. President,
Ms. Brickway?
maybe this will help. I think what Steve was saying is go ahead, you could have the first reading, and you can always amend it at the second reading or table it, so you at least get one reading done. What I would suggest, just asking is let Jonathan know, do you want him to schedule some meetings like next week, and instead of waiting 2 weeks to do anything at all?
Yes.
But, so hopefully, I guess maybe that, does that make sense?
Mr. President, yes, Peggy, that helps. I want to make sure we keep it moving while we have a chance to do the town meeting, so.
Mr. President,
Mr. Ray Culbertson?
second Don's motion.
Hold on. I don't
No,
know
I'm
that-
sorry. I'll make a motion that we put ordinance number 20 on the table.
I'll second that.
All right, a motion by Mr. Ray Culbertson, second by Ms. Bettinghouse to place ordinance number 20, 2022 on the table. Are there any remarks? All those in favor to place ordinance 20 on the table, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? So ordered. Clerk, will you please give the first reading of ordinance number 20, 2022?
Ordinance number 20, 2022, an ordinance submitting to the electors of St. Bernard certain amendments to the charter and declaring an emergency.
Members of council, you've heard the first reading of ordinance number 20, 2022. What is your pleasure?
Mr. President,
Ms. Bettinghouse?
I make a motion that ordinance number 20, 2022 take its regular course.
A motion by Ms. Bettinghouse, second by Ms. Hausfeld, that ordinance number 20, 2022 take its regular course. Are there any remarks? We're about to go to old business, so we can poll everybody there. Clerk, will you please, please, all those in favor of this, hang on here, I got a regular course, we'll need a vote. Clerk, please call the roll on regular course.
Mr. Turkey? Mr. Brickwig?
Aye.
Ms. Hausfeld?
Aye.
Mr. Bob Culbertson?
Aye.
Ms. Bettinghouse?
Aye.
Mr. Ray Culbertson?
Aye.
And Mr. Schildmeyer.
7 ayes, no nays. Ordinance number 20, 2022 will take its regular course. All right, at this time, does anyone on council have anything under old business?
Mr. President,
Ms. Bettinghouse?
I just have one quick question for Jonathan. I might have missed this, but when you were talking about the resource officer, and you said they agreed to pay 75%, who's they? Is that the district?
So, yes, the
Okay.
school district has actually, they're the ones that actually proposed that, came back to the table. We talked about it several years ago. They came back to the table with that taking the majority of the responsibility, so yes.
And then the
it-
city would pay for,
Yes,
Okay.
but then and just so you're aware, so basically, again, talking about 75%, again, includes total compensation and benefits that has been calculated, and that was calculated for a top step officer. So we weren't assuming that it was someone out of the academy, the first step going into that position. And with that as well, then in the off months, summertime, that officer would come back into the rotation, which actually works out well because then to help backfill during vacation time and whatnot. So it is a true benefit to already have somebody internal.
thank you.
Mr. President,
Mr. DeBerke?
is that officer going to need a car up at school, or is he going to take his own car up to school?
Mr. President,
Mayor Stucci?
there would be one of the older cruisers supplied just to be there because they could use that anyhow in the morning because again, for traffic control before and after.
I was curious as whether we got 3 or 4 officers on duty, 4 or 5 cars. I was just making sure we didn't have cars.
Mr. President,
Mayor Stucci?
yes, we will maintain cars, and I actually will be talking to you about that later part of the year as well, based on the vehicles that we have. But yes, we have 6 cruisers that are available currently.
Anyone else under old business? Does anyone on council have anything under new business?
Mr. President,
Mr. Bob Culbertson?
I guess we'll talk about the charter, just poll people. If you, I don't, personally, like I said in my comments earlier, the people that I've heard from was leaning more with the manager route than the administrator. So it'd be interesting to see, a broader polling or listening to a larger audience to see, you know, what they're in favor of. But, you know, like I said, the people that I've heard from, not 75, only a handful of people. We're more looking at the city manager route and want to go more that route. So that's just what I'm hearing.
Anyone else on the new business?
Yes, Mr. President.
Ms. Houseville.
I have a couple things. I know we're dealing with the charter right now, and I understand that, but I think these have to be addressed also. Streets in St. Bernard, we need to start looking at the infrastructure and doing something more with the streets. I don't want to, with a lack of better words, we're starting to look bad, and I don't want it to get any worse than what it is now. And I just think we need to start now. I know we're dealing with the charter, and that's a lot to deal with, but we need to start looking at this stuff now and start taking the bull by the horn and doing something. With that being said, I've got a couple things I'm grouping together. Grass around St. Bernard is atrocious. And Tommy, I know you're trying to keep up on that, but I don't know if we need stricter laws, if we need more penalties, whatever the deal is, especially with having renters own property. Did I say that right? Yeah, that thing. Just something needs to be done. So I don't know if we can look at doing something stronger. I know I reported to you on one particular property, and they did cut the grass, but they let all these wild weeds acting as wild flowers continue to stay there, and it looks horrible, in my opinion. Of course, it's my opinion. Also, at the pool, because I have been spending a lot of times at our pool, there's areas, and I don't know why it wasn't addressed before the pool actually opened, but going down the steps at the pool, right there by the slide, there is big concrete patches that are out of there. That should have been patched and taken care of before the pool ever opened. Along with our slide, what is going on with our slide? I've been down there every day since the first day it opened, with the exception of being on vacation, and our slide's never been opened. And we have this huge, beautiful pool that you can't use because the slide's not open. And I'm gonna give some sort of leeway because of being at the YMCA every day, I know some of the pools are colder, but this old body just can't handle that cold water. And I don't know why our heater isn't on, especially when the night's temperatures are getting low. I know during the day it's hot, but when you get in that water and it's cold, you don't have a lot of adults that want to swim in that kind of water. And I just think these are different things that need to be addressed, especially with having the extra, I won't say the extra money, but we do have money in the reserves that we can spend a little bit to make, and we're doing all this great stuff with our parks, but I don't want our pool area to start falling apart with not taking care of issues down there. Just my personal opinion.
Mr. President.
Mayor Stuchel.
So I'm going to defer to Tom Paul on a couple things here, but just to start on the first, being the streets. So that's not something that's totally being ignored. So we have someone looking at some of the issues on Vine Street as well. That has all of a sudden started rapidly deteriorating. So we're trying to look to see what might be related to what work was done when underground utilities were addressed, when the streetscape program was done. But again, when the work that was done, there's been a rapid breakdown in several different areas on Vine. As far as any of the work that was done previously was just surface, just for aesthetic purposes. So the roadbed may be deteriorating in areas, and there are spots that are rapidly popping up. I do know that we have had an increased amount of traffic in and out of the village. Heavier loads maybe potentially more than normal. Again, the Vine Street is a major thoroughfare, obviously, for bus traffic. We now have new local industry. So again, it is an issue. and it needs to be looked at. So we need to, we're having that evaluated to determine what potentially needs to be done. So whether or not it's a, I don't want to call it a Band-Aid, but whether or not spot patching, whether or not we need to look at entirely, redoing the road bed itself. But of course, the one thing that to keep in consideration that currently right now, while we have a major construction project going on in the village, I'm not saying that we should tolerate the actual, potholes and other things. But obviously we want to start looking at what can be done after that major project is finished, because aside from the construction, the continued materials being hauled in, there's also going to be the demo of the old buildings. So if we can look at what needs to be done with core sampling and looking at that, but we are addressing some of the areas so that we can get some immediate patches done, but they are going to have to dig out those spots. It's not a matter of just laying some asphalt initially. And then addressing some of the other streets as well, above and beyond what we do when we do the major projects like the upcoming, the one particular that we have for the year. So we can look at that, but that is being addressed because, again, as I said, it catches my eye, not just seeing it, but driving Vine Street every day, I'm hitting every pothole as well. So, and again, we are looking at that. As far as the grass, I'm going to probably defer to Tom Paul, but I'm going to skip over to the pool as well. Yes, I am equally as critical about the pool. So, that's not being ignored. It has been going through the slide, been going through a patching process that does take time because of the fiberglass and whatnot. We may actually be looking at trying to expedite that by looking at a third party to finish the repair because of the spider cracks and whatnot. So it is not actually safe for it to be used right this moment. Yes, it should have been done in the off season, if you want my honest opinion, but it is in a multi-step process, but we're probably going to bring somebody else. The step, there is no excuse for that. I go down there and find stuff wrong on a regular basis. So again, yes, it needs to be addressed. Is there any reason that it should have been like that now? Probably not. I'm not going to make excuses, but it needs to be fixed. So as far as on Mr. Paul to sum up on anything further with the pool and the grass, I'm going to defer to him.
Mr. President. Mr. Bull. I suggest that you allow a citation for the high grass. I've been fed up with it since the second year I've been here. People know the gray areas. Any movement whatsoever, they can go out with a weed eater. The whole process starts over. Cincinnati cites people right away. I would look at that. As far as the pool, I had one worker. We lost Ben, who was the helper, so he tried to do the entire pool by himself. The slide is toxic, so no one can be around. And if you'll remember, last year the pool didn't open day one and stay open. It opened on the weekends, and couple weeks it was closed. So he took that into his head that, okay, I got time. He didn't manage to make it. So the slide is now probably 3/4 of the way finished. So we're in the process of looking for a professional that can come in and maybe do it overnight, which I doubt because it has to dry. And again, it is toxic. So you may be looking at closing the pool until the slide is done. The concrete, I'm not sure what happens. I do know that they patched. Now, it very well could have fallen off. I don't know. But in the past, as you know, we have found picnic tables in the bottom of the pool. We have found ducks in the pool. We have found people swimming at night in the pool. So again, we try our best. So, and that's where we're at.
Mr. President.
Mr. President,
Mr. DeBerke.
Tommy, can you get with Valerie, figure out the ordinance we need for grass? You say we need to cite people? We need to come up with a new ordinance?
Mr. President.
Mr. Paul.
Yes, I'll talk to Valerie. Thank you.
President.
Have for committee of the whole? 2 weeks?
Mr. President, yes. I'll talk with Mr.
Thank you.
Paul and we'll get that done.
Mr. Bob Culbertson.
Valerie, I thought, you're just looking, I thought I could remember, we used to have a code enforcer that would go around, and I thought there was something where, can't remember what it was, but it was something they couldn't go around and just look for properties. They had to have some sort of
It's a selection process by street.
process of looking at only these streets, and they just couldn't drive around all day and cite people.
Mr. President.
Paul.
So basically, our law is if your grass is 8 inches, it's against the law. I don't see why we can't just cite them immediately. However, we do have a sanitation officer who goes around, looks at it, we send a letter. We actually ask in my 7 years here that we streamline it, because before we gave them 2 weeks. If you remember, council pushed it down to 8 days. So we send the letter, then a certified letter. And if the owner doesn't respond, we can't go on to that property. Until after a certain amount of time. So, and I forget, don't have that in my head right now, but, and then we go in. So what I have found is that if we do go in and cut it, sometimes people pay. And the least amount of fine was $125. The most was the property on Park Place, which came out to be $600 or $700. And it's that high again. So, but it is on the list. The process has been started. Will we ever get this money back? It costs probably more money to go down to Hamilton County Court to get the court, explain to them that this is what it is to put a lien on the property. So when you're looking at that, if that's the way you want to go, actually the people before me and myself have gone in, cut, tried to bill. It's a soft billing if we don't get the money. I shouldn't probably announce that, but if you don't get the money, you don't get the money. And remember the tale also that the lady said, I do have a grass cutting service. They bill me every month and a half, and it's $250. No, ma'am, that's me fining you. So they waited, and they paid the $250. So it's like, and it happens. And as far as wildflowers, that is not against our ordinance. So if you see wildflowers in someone's front yard, it's legal. The gardens in the front yard are legal. It is not against our ordinances.
Mr. President,
Mayor
just one clarification for Mr. Bob Culberson. So yes, we do have a code enforcement officer, but when it comes to grass and noxious weeds, that's a health code violation, so it's a different person. There can be a referral that can come from our code enforcement officer because he's there for addressing a HIP violation, but he then would refer it, and then it gets referred to Robert Evans, who then takes it the next step with Mr. Paul. So knowing again that there's then a process that has to go through, and it still doesn't get resolved overnight. But I agree with what you're saying about trying to go through a different process where they can be cited.
Mr. President?
Ms. Helms.
I might have a solution for, if we cite people and then they have a balance and they're not paying. The Ohio Attorney General's office does a fine job collecting unpaid taxes. There's no reason that, I think they do collect other unpaid fines as well, that we couldn't send those to the Ohio Attorney General's office as well, if we so desired.
Mr. President,
Mr. Taberky.
can we have the police or even the garbage guys when they're out, right, jog down the addresses, give them to you?
Mr. President,
Mr. Paul.
I believe we have all the list of the grass right now. I don't need any more help. What we need is for it to be cut. And that is a process, and they're not following it.
Mr. President,
Ms. Bettinghouse.
Jonathan, where we are with that house that had the fire on Greenlee Avenue?
So that we did retain outside counsel, and currently the gentleman has been served. I will hopefully have an update very shortly as to where we are in the next step in the process. And we were informed that it wasn't going to be an overnight deal, but we are taking actual legal action on that, and the gentleman has been served. So, but it is in process, and as I said, I wish it could be a quicker one. But again, he does have rights and a rights to appeal as well. So again, we are working through that, and hopefully we'll have an update very soon. But it's not being ignored. It is actively being pursued.
Mr. President,
Ms. Housefeld.
one last thing. Jonathan, I know I've talked to you, I believe I talked to Mr. Paul about Chalet and Hager. It's not only the older gentleman that has talked to me, but now I have young families that are also talking to me about how fast some of those cars are going up there, and they're afraid that their small children are, if they dash out the wrong time, they're gonna get hurt. So I was just curious what the update was. I know people want parking in certain places, people want speed bumps. I didn't know if we've come up with any kind of solution for up there yet or not.
Other than some, Mr. President,
Mayor Stuckey.
other than some increased patrols, not anything definite as of yet. Looked at the idea of potentially the mounting of, unfortunately with the concrete, I'm not saying that's more involved, but having the asphalt, it makes it a little easier as far as installing temporary speed humps, which is an option as well, rather than trying to put something permanent that may be a bigger inconvenience than what it may be worth. But we need to look at some speed control devices in the area, because again, with just the free run all the way around the ring, how that could be addressed. So I'm hoping to have, some further discussion as to how we might be able to break it up a little bit to force, again, whether or not when you come to the top of the hill, a required stop sign instead of being able to continue, whether or not we can put anything to slow people down. I don't know what can be done with the concrete, but I believe we may have to look at, all the way around? No, I apologize, thought it was concrete. Got it. So, but we may be able to, instead of going to the extreme, and I've actually, when I made a recent trip back to my hometown of Athens, my entire neighborhood is nothing but speed humps. And they're all, my entire street, actually, literally, every quarter block is another speed hump. And every one of them actually was not constructed of asphalt or concrete. They were actually mounted. So they could be moved or taken up then, say, potentially during the winter months, which I actually really liked. And they were effective. And it wasn't, they may have been this wide, but so it wasn't a jarring effect on your back, but it did require you to slow down. So, I think that would be a perfect area to look at. And again, the only reason we haven't put anything like that, say on Tower, where there's been other issues near the school, is that because, again, these are constructed of plastic, they would be destroyed by the heavy equipment. But I do think that something like that would be ideal up in that neighborhood. So that could be looked at. And again, whether or not we break it up so that you don't have one free run once you make either a right-hand turn or whichever direction you want to go freely around. So I think breaking it up, whether or not, we put a stop sign in a couple different spots so that, again, you can't freely run through, but I think something obviously needs to be done. And again, incorporating some speed humps would be a great idea, but we will come up with some sort of formal plan to address that outside of just patrols.
Anyone else under new business? If not, is there anyone in the audience wishing to address council this evening? Please state your name and address for the record.
Matthew Durbin, 36 Baker. One thing I'd like to ask is, Mr. Brickwick, when you gave your report, I've noticed you gave the fire and EMS runs. Are we no longer doing the police versions of it? So I know when Ray Carson was doing it, he would give the police side too.
I haven't.
And as for the school resource officer, I do believe they should have a patrol car in case they do have to transport. I doubt any of them would want to use the personal car.
Mr. President, I'm actually handling that, Mr. Durbin, so that'll be under control.
And honestly, in my opinion, on the speed issue, patrolman will not help. I watch people speed every day right past police officers. They do not enforce it. They don't enforce parking either. I have to directly go down to the station and go directly to a lieutenant before it is enforced. I literally had to go down there just the other day and talk to Lieutenant Ungar. It is not enforced, and I have several residents on several different streets that will back that up. They do not see enforcement on those. Asking for extra enforcement on it will not help. They don't enforce it to begin with.
Thank you. Anyone else in the audience? If not, at this time, well, let's report. The next committee of the whole will be Thursday, July 14th at 7 p.m. And at this time, council will go into executive session to discuss pending litigation.